Hey everyone, welcome back. This week we're going to be tackling 3 more new releases on video on demand services. We have the winner of last year's jury award at the Cannes Film Festival, Bacurau. We have a politically and socially charged indie film, St. Francis. And finally we have the topic of our first review today, Trolls World Tour, the sequel to the animated musical based on the toy line. Now, Trolls World Tour is a history maker. Now, how has this movie made history? Well, Trolls World Tour is the first major American studio picture to be released simultaneously in theaters and on demand. You see, due to the recent pandemic, all but less than 20 theaters across the country have been closed. Seeing as Trolls World Tour had already released in some parts of the world before the pandemic really hit America, Universal was put in a bit of a bind. Do they delay the movie and risk losing all revenue, or do they just go ahead and release it now? So, Universal went ahead and released it now. As a result, it seems like it's been paying off. The movie has been reportedly crushing records for a launch on video on demand services. So, this sugar coated sequel to a movie based on toys may just be the film that changes the way that theatrical films are distributed from here on out. Which is pretty funny because Trolls World Tour is pretty standard stuff. Now, full disclosure here, I haven't seen the first Trolls film. I just was not that interested in it when it came out. But thankfully, the movie does begin with a brief recap of events from the first film. And one of the pluses of being a kids' movie is that the characters are deliberately written to be easy to understand. So, before I even knew it, I kind of figured out everyone's backstory, everyone's character traits, and I never felt lost. So really, if you haven't seen the first Trolls film, you're gonna be fine. Queen Poppy of the Pop Trolls Kingdom learns that the world she lives in is a much bigger place than she originally thought when she receives a warning from the Rock Trolls Kingdom, which Poppy interprets as a friendly invitation. The Rock Trolls, led by Queen Barb, are traveling across the world stealing powerful strings which contain the essence of music itself from the rest of the world's kingdoms: country, classical, funk, and techno. Poppy, alongside her best friend Branch, must embark to save the world before all of the world's music is assimilated into hard rock. But along the way, Poppy will learn about accepting differences and what it means to be a true queen. The story mostly sets itself up as an excuse for the animators and designers to go crazy, as our characters go from one country to another, meeting different cultures and people. Each world is visually unique and really fun to look at, but what really caught my eye were the textures of the movie. This is a movie you could really almost touch. You know that feeling when you brush some really light fuzz? That's pretty much this entire movie in a nutshell. And it's a fun movie to watch in that way. A lot of the animation also reminded me of the Lego movie, even down to certain characters and environments animated to look like it's stop motion. Unfortunately, the film isn't quite as witty as any of the Lego films, though I haven't seen Ninjago, and I've heard, it's not that great. So Trolls World Tour isn't really witty so much as it is kinda attention deficient. There's a lot of images that just get thrown at the screen in quick succession, and it can get a little overwhelming. But the main drawing point of the movie isn't the animation, but the music. The voice cast includes musically talented stars such as Anna Kendrick, Justin Timberlake, Rachel Bloom, and even legends such as Ozzy Osbourne, George Clinton, and Mary J. Blige. Now, seeing as this is a jukebox musical, there aren't that many original songs in the film. Most of it is cribbed from real life. Barracuda, Gangnam Style, even Beethoven's Fifth Symphony are all paraded in a cavalcade of, hey, I recognize that song. I'm not a huge fan of jukebox musicals. I feel that the movies are usually written to accommodate the songs and not the other way around. As a result, you have these songs that get crammed in there Even if they rewrite the lyrics to try and make it seem as if it's fitting the moment in the film, usually it just feels forced and unnecessary. The only time the movie feels really creative musically is when it does roll out its original tracks. And the film songs aren't that amazing, but at least there's some effort put into lyric writing and, that they actually fit the moment in the story. If this review is starting to sound a little harsh, I'd like to go ahead and mitigate that. Trolls World Tour is not a bad movie. It's a pretty fun one. There are a lot of cool sight gags, a lot of which made me chuckle. Like I mentioned, the animation is really impressive, but what really stuck out to me was the story. There are some cool twists that the movie threw in that caught and kept my attention. So I don't want to give those away here, but if you're expecting it to be entirely predictable, you may be surprised. But above all else, I think the movie also has a surprisingly poignant message that hopefully kids will latch on to as long as they're not being bombarded by the candy colored visuals or the chart topping singles. As a result, I'm going to go ahead and give Trolls World Tour a 7 out of 10. I would definitely say it's not worth it, the full $20 price tag if you're like me and you're single and you live all alone, or if you're even not into kids' movies. But if you've got a family, if you've got some kids who, you know, have been watching Frozen 2 800 times during this quarantine, and you really want to entertain them with something different, then it might be worth a look. It's a 48-hour rental, just so you know, but you can treat it like a family night at the movies at home. And I think that alone will make it worth it. So yeah, I would say go ahead and give it a look, but only if you're a parent. And as long as you accept that you're not the target audience, you should make it through just fine. It's 90 minutes. It won't kill you. Moving right along to St. Francis, an indie drama executive produced, written, and starring Kelly O'Sullivan, who is best known for being a series regular on the short-lived USA comedy series Sirens. St. Francis follows the story of Bridget, a chronically depressed 34-year-old who recently has quit her server job so that she become a seasonal nanny for a witty and feisty 6-year-old girl named Frances. However, at the same time, Bridget accidentally becomes pregnant and chooses to abort it, which causes tension between her and her sorta kinda not really boyfriend. But as the summer rolls on, Bridget will learn a multitude of life lessons and gradually open herself up to family and love. Now, St. Francis has its heart in the right place. It's clearly a passion project for O'Sullivan, as indicated by her committed performance. In fact, a lot of performances in the film are above average, with only a few noticeable duds among the film's rather large cast. In terms of acting and directing, St. Francis is a top-notch indie film. But where St. Francis falls flat is the screenplay. The movie wants to be about a lot of things. In one scene, Bridget is struggling with the aftermath of her abortion. In the next scene, Bridget is trying to save a dying marriage between two gay women who have differing religious views. And then the next scene, Bridget is having second thoughts about her relationship and decides to dump her sorta not really boyfriend for a cartoonishly stereotypical sleazebag music teacher. It wants to be about commitment, it wants to be about abortion, it wants to be about gay marriage, it wants to be about women's rights. It can't focus on any one thing. And as a result, the movie comes off as scattershot. And unfortunately, it's not just the thematic materials that are scattershot, but also the character development. The heart of the movie is supposed to be between the relationship of Bridget and Frances. However, their growth isn't really growth. It's inconsistent. They're relationship comes up and down very sporadically. In one scene, the two of them love each other, but in the next scene, Bridget decides that she wants to have nothing to do with Francis, without much reason for her to feel that way either. As a result, the movie just doesn't flow naturally. And not only that, but I had to question a lot of the character motivations in the film. If Bridget can't stand Francis so much, then why did she decide to become a nanny? And not only that, but why hasn't Bridget been fired? Because by the point that this movie would have ended in the real world, Bridget would have been fired before the 1 hour mark. She shows signs of true incompetence at her job that are so unbelievable that it surprised me that there wasn't a scene where she got fired and she has to win herself back. And also, it comes down to the interview as well when Bridget was applying for the job, because she very transparently couldn't take care of herself. So why did her parents feel compelled to hire this woman for the job? And the movie, I'm sure it tried to justify it, but it wasn't enough. And it just made everyone involved look irresponsible and just downright stupid. And it took me out of the movie almost completely. Now, the screenplay to St. Francis isn't the only thing that's inconsistent. The cinematography is particularly spotty. I counted on at least 3 different occasions of the boom operator being caught in the reflection of car windows as they're either driving off or pulling away. 1 or 2 times, that's understandable. Mistakes happen all the time. I've been on sets. The continuity errors, it's whatever, you gotta live with it. Sometimes they just escape. 3 times tells me that there was hardly any care put into the way this movie looks. And what really spells that out for me is that there are a couple of really good looking shots in this movie. Shots that I can remember pretty distinctly. But to me, that means that whoever was in charge of the cinematography of this film prioritized those shots. They wanted to get those looking good and then just kinda crapped out the rest. The movie can't seem to decide between whether it wants to be cinema verite or if it wants to go over traditional Hollywood look with nice sweeping dolly moves or pans. As a result, the film looks unfocused, almost as if it was shot by 2 different cinematographers. The lighting is pretty flat throughout the whole film. It just, for the most part, is not a good looking movie. It really sucks to tear this movie apart because the filmmakers really were trying to say something. And in terms of the devotion from the cast and crew, minus the DP, there was real passion put into this project. The people behind this movie really wanted it to work, and they tried their damnedest to make it work. But the movie just fails at fundamental storytelling and character development levels. And as a result, I have to give St. Francis a 5 out of 10, based solely on the strength of the acting alone. I don't want to end today's episode on a downer, so let's go ahead and move on to our final movie of the week, the Brazilian thriller Bacurau. Bacurau is directed by Kleber Mendonça Filho and Juliano Dones, and I apologize if I didn't quite get those pronunciations right. The story begins when a scientist returns home to attend the funeral of her grandmother and the town of Bacurau's matriarch. Following the funeral, strange events begin to happen to the small town, including it vanishing from satellite maps. And that is all I'm going to say on the story of this film. Bacurau is the kind of movie where you want to go into it knowing as little as possible. What I will say about the movie, though, is that it is the best kind of B movie, or a genre picture, because Bacurau is a very prescient social commentary on current events happening in Brazil. As the country heads down the road of authoritarianism, movies like Bacurau can be a cry of anger and a warning that usual studio pictures or high budget movies can't afford to be. Now, far too often, I see reviews for movies that try to compare themselves to directors like John Carpenter, for instance. And this movie does as well in several reviews. But what I've noticed when it comes to those reviews, and I am a huge fan of Carpenter, is that the only comparison you can make with Carpenter is that the movie is scary. So, hey, this movie kind of scared me. John Carpenter is the only horror movie director whose name I know, and my review desperately needs a comparison. So, this is kind of like a John Carpenter movie. 9 times out of 10, that's 100% wrong. Bacurau is that 1 out of 10. This is a film that is definitely inspired and draws quite a bit from the films of Carpenter and other directors of the 70s and 80s, but it never feels derivative of those films. It uses those filmmaking aspirations or techniques and applies them to Brazil's current political climate to make a very interesting and engaging film while also being incredibly entertaining. Bacurau filled me with the kind of joy that the best kind of genre films can have. Because even though it is trying to say something about the social climate or it wants to be politically charged, it never forgets to be entertaining. The movie wants to be a work of entertainment first while also saying something, and I always appreciate that because when the movie tends to go one way or the other, it can be a little overwhelming. Bacurau manages to strike that balance. But what also stuck out to me about Bacurau is that it is a film made by filmmakers who really enjoy cinematic techniques in a variety of them. It's not content with just, typical cuts. It will use wipe cuts, the type that you see in movies like Star Wars. But it's not trying to ape Star Wars. It's more of a harkening back to the films of, say, Kurosawa, who loved using wipe cuts and where Star Wars drew its inspiration from. But the best part about Bacurau is it's not using it as a parody like you usually see in movies that aren't Star Wars anymore. The movie is actually using it as an effective tool. And the same goes for a lot of the other camera and editing tricks in this movie. You'll see like different perspectives being used. Interesting. I can't remember the name of the technique. I believe it's split screen, where a character is in focus in front of the camera and then in the back the same object is there's an object in the back that's in focus, but there's like a blurry line in between. I cannot remember its name, but you can see it in films like a lot of thrillers in the 70s used that technique. I unfortunately cannot remember what it's called, but when you see it, you'll know what I'm talking about. Now, yes, Bacurau is a good-looking movie, a damn good-looking movie, but what is really special about the movie is Bacurau. The movie takes its sweet time spelling out the intricacies of this town. You get to know the way it functions, how the characters interact with one another, the way each element of the town works in conjunction with each other. The movie really wants you to get to know the town before stuff starts to happen to it. And it works really effectively because when bad things start to happen and the suspense starts to amp up, I felt my heart racing. because I really didn't want to see bad things happen to these people. It's the kind of movie that really earns its suspense. And I believe that the real protagonist of the movie is Bacurau. And I couldn't help but root for it. 30 minutes into this movie, I had to stop because I forgot that I wasn't taking notes. So I had to pause the film and get out my notepad because I was so engrossed in the movie. And then about 15 minutes later, I stopped it again and I went on Twitter and just had to gush about how much I was enjoying this movie. Bacurau may be the best film I've seen since Midsummer. It is a truly confident, fun, entertaining work of art that isn't afraid to be kinda schlocky. There are a few unbelievable characters in the film, but in a movie like this, who needs moral grays? Why not just go black and white, good versus evil? It's a little more fun that way. And I feel that trying to do moral grays would kind of dilute the message that the film is trying to say. It's a beautiful film. It's a fun movie. It is so satisfying to watch. I cannot recommend it enough. If this channel can be good for one thing, if I can get one person to watch Bacurau and they love it too, then as far as I'm concerned, this series is a success. Doesn't matter how many views I get, because this movie deserves to be seen. Bacurau gets a 10 out of 10. Cool. That's it for this week's episode, everyone. But before we go, let's go ahead and do a quick recap. Trolls World Tour scores a 7 out of 10. It's a harmless movie that kids will more than likely enjoy, even as they're being bombarded by candy-colored visuals and chart-topping singles. And parents may not find much to enjoy in this film, but it is a smartly written movie, and the animation is good to look at. St. Francis scores a 5 out of 10. Natural directing and writing is undermined by an unnatural screenplay and inconsistent cinematography. And finally, Bacurau gets this show's first 10 out of 10. It is a confidently made, wonderfully executed thriller that had me on the edge of my seat from beginning to end, while also delivering some pretty effective social commentary. Once again, thanks for watching, everyone. If you want to watch any of the movies that I reviewed this week, you can find Trolls World Tour on pretty much every video-on-demand service. As for St. Francis and Bacurau, what you can do is you can look up your local art house theaters and see if they're hosting any virtual cinema events. The ticket sales to these films, i.e. the rental fees, can actually directly benefit the movie theater of your choice if they happen to be carrying that film. So for St. Francis, you can find that on websites such as Oscilloscope, and Bacurau can be found on Kino Now. We'll be back next week to take on 3 more new movies, one that premiered at South by Southwest last year, and 2 that premiered at this year's Sundance Film Festival. For the South by Southwest film, we've got the supernatural comedy, Extraordinary, and as for Sundance, we have the drama, Never Rarely, Sometimes Always, and we've got the new biopic premiering on Netflix, Sergio. Until then, stay healthy, and please enjoy some movies. Like Bacurau. Watch Bacurau. Watch Bacurau.